contextualize that history for new employees and to write it in an inspirational tone, so that you can hand this out as a document. So I'm asking it to do something pretty complicated, so it takes a little while. So anyway, I don't know. Can you guys probably can't see this very well, but it came up. Let me see how many page history this is. You guys can see, and you can save to a note. I think there's a button here that I can press to convert it to a Google Doc, or you can just copy it to a Google Doc. So it came up with maybe a 2 to 3 page history. You can fact check Reverend Mrs. David Buckley. Is that right, Dan?
Yep.
And 1924. Did I get the date? Get the date right?
Yes.
Let's see. Talks a lot about different aspects of the history, and you can decide how you want this emphasized in various capacities. So anyway, so that's one way this can be used. But the idea, I use that specific example because you can do that in any of those domains that I listed before. So I showed these kind of domains here. So I'm using that for employee and client training and customizing contents for your audience and connect with larger history. But you could use something like that with development. You use that on, say you're trying to do a deep dive, like you want to provide a really good research report on the state of homelessness and the state of addiction in your city. Well, this is a perfect tool for that. You can, bring in 50 different articles, 50 different, studies and things along those lines, and then you can, ask various questions for that. All right. Now, we also use this in our courses. And I'm not going to go through all of this, so I'll just show you as an example. This is where I use this in a course. And what I did is I imported all the books that were going to be used in the course. I imported different, some of the key videos. And what I learned over time, what is AI good at? Like, there are things where it is incredibly worse than us, but there's things that it's better than us at. And you want to use it for that. So I used it to draw connection. So like, motivational interviewing is huge in rescue missions. And there's, we have the students read about 1,500 pages on family therapy. And I wanted to know which model of family therapy is most similar to motivational interviewing, because I wanted to tie in motivational interviewing. I can't figure that out. Even someone who's an expert in this may not understand that. So, but the AI was able to give me an answer. So then we knew, whenever it covers this particular week, I think it was called solution-focused therapy, solution-focused family therapy. Whenever we covered the week on solution-focused family therapy, we integrated motivational interviewing. Another one I did was, I know that people at missions deal with workaholism. And one of the theories they use is Bowen theory. So I wanted to explain, using the concepts of the course, how workaholism ties in. Because that can be, this is a family counseling, but a lot of times whenever people have an affair, they're having an affair not with another person, but with their work. And I wanted to basically help educate our students on that. So I worked with the AI to kind of write a 5-page paper that kind of is very specific on a very specific issue. None of the books, none of the resources would cover that. So that's an example of how I use this. Sometimes I would use it for, so these are examples, and I can kind of pull up the link. This is the article that I had it write, for students to basically be more aware of the ways that they might, be getting addicted in that. So, becoming workaholics and ignoring their family. Other things. So this is, a lot of times there's Christian books, but I want to basically explain some of the problems of secular approaches. And sometimes the books cover what I want to get to, and sometimes they don't. So in this case, I wanted to basically explain the limits of scientism. So all of counseling kind of falls within the field of scientism, and scientism basically makes assumptions about the world so that you can get the whole field to work. But those assumptions aren't necessarily true. They just make the field work. So, scientism is the idea that only what you can perceive through the lens of science is real. And there's a whole lot of people who have critiqued that and explaining that to our students. So these are all examples of what I would describe as generic content that I'm generating using AI that's going to improve a course. So that's an example, again, of what you might do with staff training.
Andrew, are you sharing your screen?
Oh, I'm not. Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks for letting me know that. Okay, sorry. Yeah, if that happens again, let me know because I keep going back and forth. So this is the emotional fusion article that I was using. This is the philosophical assumptions of scientism and counseling. These are some of the prompts that I've been asking to get that. I'm not going to go into all of this. It's pretty good at designing case stories, like coming up with case studies. So I said, you're an expert at designing case studies to be used in Christian counseling master's courses. So you have to tell the AI who it is, because it's good at playing roles. So that's one of the key things of prompt engineering, is you say who it is. So design a case study story that can help students apply the narrative therapy model to a family. One of the family members has a very negative personal narrative because of their own history with addiction. Add details of the story to make it seem realistic and lifelike. You should focus primarily on providing the story to the case rather than making assignment elements to the case. So this last step was something that I added later because whenever I asked it to do a case story, it turned the whole thing into an assignment. And I wanted to get the case story, and then I separately created an assignment. And, I rewrote, 20 to 40% of these things. And, I translated that, and then I used that as a case study. I could have gone out and bought a case study somewhere, but it's more effective to get a very specific case study. So that's another example. And then there's other things to try to translate theory into practice. So, I was trying to figure out what are the interventions related to addiction and family counseling. So I said, what are the most common interventions related to addiction and family counseling? And it gave me some ideas. And then, I came up with a role play assignment related to an intervention. Using that. Now, this is an example of where I've used AI for an image. So my pastor, he talked about how organizations secularize, and he used the M&M car. He's a big NASCAR fan. And he said, the M&M car, the primary brand on the M&M car is M&M's, right? And the secondary, and this is the way it should be for Christians. We can have our primary brand needs to be Jesus. The secondary brand needs to be these other things, So M&M pays a couple $1 million to get their brand, and then these other people pay like $50,000 to get their logos. This is the way our Christian identity should be. But I wanted to borrow his example, but I wanted to make it better using AI. So I, asked it to generate a NASCAR with Jesus on it. There are no NASCARs out there with Jesus on it, but I just wanted to make a point. So you can use this. So this was done in, Microsoft. So it used to be called Bing Chat whenever I did it, but now they've renamed it to something else. So now a lot of the questions related to AI are how do you avoid problems? I've been trying to get some of my faculty to work with this, and initially it worked well, but in some cases it made their average output go down in quality significantly. So a lot of it is you have to kind of train people and know what the limits are. But some of the questions is if you're working with AI, you have to consider how important it is to customize the output. So almost all the examples I used for you guys were things that were largely generic content. But if you want something that's highly customized, like say you want to write a customized response to someone who just gave you $100,000. You shouldn't be using AI for that. It's going to sound generic, right? So you don't want to be using AI for that. But most often, I'm just using AI as a source for research. So, for example, whenever I'm writing a course, I look online for all the syllabi that are publicly available of a similar course. And I just learn looking over their syllabi. Well, I'll do the same thing with AI. I'll say, design a syllabi on this topic. And I'll compare it, and surprisingly, the AI-generated syllabi usually is better than 90% of the ones that are actually real courses at other universities. The other big thing to avoid problems with AI is to train staff. The biggest kind of lesson is that you treat it like you would doing Google searches, but with more skepticism. So Google searches, if someone says, why is that true? And they say, well, I saw it on the internet or I saw it on YouTube, we've all learned to laugh at that, right? Because, there's so much that's just made up. But it's even more made up a lot of times with AI, because like I use the example of, the student who use the AI to generate a prompt, like it will really make stuff up, like invent new books of the Bible, invent new, verses in the Bible. So you have to read what it provides very carefully. There's ways on these things that you can check the sources. So in the examples that I was showing you, and it's the same type of thing, usually with Google, it has the source. So a lot of times there's a quite very tight linkage to that source, and it will link you directly to the chapter of this book that actually had a chapter on City Union Mission in Kansas City. But other times it'll link you to a source, and you can tell it just made it up. So you have to actually look at that. Organizationally, you probably need to have some guidelines on key areas. Like if you're going to use this for fundraising, you need to have guidelines so people aren't writing generic responses to your major donor. As an example, right? So, the common problems I mentioned, hallucinations. So AIs all work by, it's essentially statistics. So it's basically guessing what the next word should be. So sometimes whenever it's guessing, it makes up things. It's like, well, this sounds like a book of the Bible, and this sounds like it might be a verse in that book of the Bible, so it creates that. The other problem is generic responses. If you want something that's somewhat generic, then that's great. But if you want something customized, then it's more difficult. Recognize the e-bike problem with learning. If people are using AI and you ask them to do something, then they're just going to have the e-bike go up the hill. And the whole point of learning is that you're pedaling to go up the hill, and potentially using AI to cheat, for various things. So why don't I pause there and just ask for folks who use AI, and based on what I've shared so far, what are your concerns? What are your questions? And even if you haven't used AI, what are your concerns? What are your questions? Does this intrigue you? Make you think, okay, maybe I'll use this, or does this make you think that Andrew's a nerd and I'm not going to be as nerdy as Andrew? So
I wonder if one way
jump in with questions.
to figure out the answer to your question there is to listen to the rest of that podcast. Is that something that you can share with us? If it takes 3 minutes to do that, and we can learn to do that with our own missions, or even just a generic history of the rescue mission work around the country, that could be useful for our onboarding new staff.
Yeah, so you mentioned that generic version of the podcast, and I'm going to give some links at the end. But I took those and I converted what was just audio into a YouTube video. So I'll send this, and you can access it there. It's also, the audio is actually in this toolkit. I'm going to have a screenshot where you can get to this toolkit. It's this rescue mission history for new staff. But I also have a YouTube link there that I'll be able to send you. I think this one is actually on our website now. On our YouTube page. This one, I created one for Bay Area Rescue Mission to customize it, and I didn't link that because I haven't talked with Graham. I'm sure he's probably fine with it, but I didn't want to put it on there publicly available for that. So one other example, and I showed you these examples that are just audio only. One of our partners used a tool that does the same thing, but the whole, and I'll show you this real quick also, the whole person is simulated through AI. So he took one of my talks that was recorded and then converted it to having someone else present. So this woman is not a real woman, and he's providing an AI overview of an hour-long lecture that I did.
and I'm the teaching assistant for Dr. Andrew. Hello everyone, my name is Madeline, and I'm the teaching assistant for Dr. Andrew Sears. Today, I'm excited to share his vision on why Christian higher education must be reinvented, especially for those serving the poor and those struggling with addiction. In this presentation, we'll explore our core values centered around Jesus and how a renewed theological vision can reshape our educational institutions to meet today's challenges.
All right, so for this ministry, I mean, on one level, you're kind of like, gee whiz, that's interesting. For this ministry that I was working with, they're in 100 countries and like over 100 languages, and they need to be able to present material. What this is doing is this is allowing them to present material with people that look like the audience that they're serving, that automatically translate into the audience that they're serving, so that they can have videos for, they're serving millions of people in these countries. So that's another example of things that you could do. But you could imagine using this with clients. Most missions, they might cover 2 or 3 languages with their staff, but what do you do if you get someone who's they speak Hmong and that's their only language? Well, that's difficult, but you could probably create an orientation video in Hmong for them, using this tool. So yeah, I have questions.
Podcast links, I'd be happy to share them with the larger group if it's available. Okay. Whatever shareable.
Yeah, definitely.
Can we see the cross? You were going to show us the cross that AI generated at the end of your podcast.
The cross?
Did you mention you generated a cross, an icon, or?
No, it was the NASCAR. It was the NASCAR video that I used. But you can do it, with the cross, and I can show you. I mean, let me just show you an example of how you do that. Is I'll just do create an image of a cross with the words. That's good. All right. I'm on a different one. I think I have to switch to this. So let me copy this prompt. There's different versions of Gemini, and for whatever reason, I don't think that one can be done there. So, all right. Other questions that people had?
So is that
or comment?
Is that based on the collection of data of those hundreds of missions that you have to generate that cross?
No.
Okay.
So it will generate it based on its own kind of AI algorithms for things along those lines. So. What are other people's thoughts? I want to engage with you guys. So, come on. What are you thinking related to AI on this?
Any advice on using AI as far as our rescue mission social media? I've created images for another agency, and they look super real. Is there pros and cons? There's a social media session next door that's pretty popular. I don't think they talked about AI, but that's something our missions do. AI and social media, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, creating images for social media could be, really helpful. If I were doing that, it's going to be kind of tricky trying to figure out. You don't want some sort of negative PR from something like that. So trying to make sure how you present that, that you're, not getting a negative, PR, however you're presenting that. But I think that's a great way to do that. So, other examples, or who else has used? I mean, just raise your hand if you use AI at all. Okay, so what are some examples where you've used it, where you've tried to, apply? I mean, my wife uses it all the time to do vacation planning. This vacation that I just mentioned where we're in San Francisco, like, she found a good place for us to go out to eat, and I was like, wow, that was impressive, and like it had a plan for the whole day. So what are some examples of what you all have, how you guys have used it, especially if it relates to, your organization?
So I was able to use
Go ahead.
it. To design a new logo for the mission. It was founded in 2001, so it's extremely old and outdated. And the people working at the mission with me were still kind of in that era. So for them, AI was something that was foreign to them or scary or whatever. But now recently, AI has advanced to the point where you can create logos and they actually get the lettering right. For the longest time, they couldn't even spell simple things like Columbus. Just spell you right. And so I was able to create a new logo, sharp, crisp, for example. Or I run the men's discipleship program, so a lot of times if guys are giving me handwritten materials or anything like that, I take a picture, send to AI, transcribes it to a Word document, done, easy. Things like that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, the image generation is really impressive. And a lot of times you got to be very specific, and you got to, it was weird how a year ago it couldn't handle text. It could do all this complicated stuff, but it couldn't handle text. Now most of them are getting to where they can put text. It would create like imaginary letters. Is what it did. But now it's able to do that. So, other uses?
It's not related to the mission, but I had AI write a book for me, and then I have it on Amazon for sale. I told it to generate.
Have you made any money?
I did a great introduction. It did the cover art. Someday I might read it, but it's clearly written by AI in the description, so no one's surprised. But it's incredible.
What's the name of it? The 10 most humble people I met the other night?
No, it was about defending against AI from an insider's perspective.
From AI.
From AI.
I have a question.
Yeah, well, my son, in one of his classes, he attends a Christian school, and one of the classes they assigned a book that was AI generated. And his favorite thing about the book was that it had all these illustrations, but all the illustrations, because they're generated by early AI, they had like comical problems. Like one guy had 7 fingers on both hands, and like AI doesn't know that people have 5 fingers. So, so he didn't pay attention to the book, but he loved the fact, that on each picture it was kind of like, can you find the AI errors, right? So
when you're using it for like publication or research for like a specific thing, do you have to acknowledge that you got your research materials from AI?
Yeah, so usually how I do that, and there's like APA standards, and I'm not as like nerdy about them because they try to do things like say you have to enter the exact prompt and on what date and things like that. But how I usually do it is, for those example documents, let me just show you kind of the bottom of the document how I usually reference it. And, this is a cross that it created. But so on this, at the bottom, this summary was generated with assistance by Notebook LM using the materials in this course. It was reviewed for accuracy and edited by City Vision faculty. So I don't want to be misrepresenting. But I also don't want to get into, like, honestly, this was like 7 or 8 different iterations, and I edited, like, probably 30% of it. And I combined basically like the response of 5 different prompts and then put it into that. So I don't want to go into all the details. So I think it is important you don't misrepresent if you're publishing things. And part of it is you just have to think through like what does it look like. But I mean, just as an example, City Union Mission could publish a new history. Like it'd be fairly easy for someone to just dump all the newsletter archives into this Notebook LM. And then combine, I know that there's a chapter in a book, and then you have some stuff on your webpage. You probably, put your YouTube videos in there, and then you could ask it to write a book on an updated history of City Union Mission. It could probably come up with, my guess is an 80-page history that's better than anything you guys currently have as an example. But that's only if someone wants to do it. But honestly, you could probably do that in a couple hours. would be my guess. And then the real work would be editing that. So yeah.
So your notebook LM is kind of your sandbox, if you will, where that's your worldview. You want to generate AI from this sandbox, not from the entire world, just this area to generate information. Is that semi-accurate?
Yeah, that's the way to think about it, because it's going to focus the topics around that, and it often refers to the sources, right? So if you're wanting to get an updated history, it's pretty easy to just take PDFs of past 20 years of stuff, and it's going to ingest all that. Now it comes up with some weird things, like I asked it to generate a timeline of missions, and it came up with, like the first couple pages was fine, but then it came up with, it just picked on one mission and then said, in this one mission, they hired this staff on this day, and this staff on this day, and this staff on this day. And I'm like, that does not belong in a comprehensive history of the rescue mission movement. Right. You know what I'm saying? So that's part of why you got to, like, it doesn't, I mean, it's fairly good at understanding what's important, but sometimes it's not. So
what does LM stand for? Book LM, you said.
What does LM stand for? It's language model. So this whole space is based on large language models. So essentially where AI came from was, once you get a critical mass of internet content, and Google came up with a new algorithm called a transformer that basically changed the whole world. And there's this debate, and I'm not going to go into the debate, like, could machines become sentient or not? Theologians like to say no, just because we're privileged. As a computer scientist, it's really a scientific question. I would have thought what we're doing with AI right now wasn't possible, but someone discovered an algorithm that made it possible. So are there other algorithms? I don't know. We don't need to go into all that, but I think we have to be humble enough, intellectually humble enough. Now, I don't think they will ever be human. I don't think that they're going to have souls. I don't think we're going to be going into heaven and all of a sudden there's going to be a bunch of AIs, right? I think the Bible gives us those answers, but how smart can these things get? If we want to just say, well, the Bible tells me they're never going to get that smart. Well, I don't know. I mean, that's really, I just sat in a self-driving car, and people, the top experts in AI 10 years ago said it's going to be, probably 50 years before we have self-driving cars. But someone discovered a new algorithm, and then that changed the game, so that's why, computer science, there are parts of it that really are a science. Like, no one knew that algorithm existed, and then they found it. Other uses or other questions, things you worry about with this? All right, I'm going to go ahead and go into some other slides. So here are some organizational strategies that I would recommend. So compile key documents by department. So AI works better in what you're getting at before with Google Notebook LM is data silos focused in a particular domain. So like programs, policies, and procedures. Man, speeding up developing policies and procedures could be helpful. I hate writing procedures, but we got hundreds and hundreds of pages of procedures. Development, grants, mission history. I use history as an example because honestly, I think this is the low-hanging fruit. And focus on mainstream adoption, not the bleeding edge. That's a kind of a tech term of, if you're trying to do the cutting edge stuff. These companies, Google and Microsoft, is where it's going to come from. Focus on them. A lot of the other companies, maybe OpenAI, but honestly, I'm really focusing on Google and Microsoft because they have to focus on the average person. There will be some specialist companies that will emerge for specialist functions. So like my wife, she does a lot of training in her contacts. So part of what she does is she can rewrite, like that video that I was showing you, where you have a person who's presenting material. My wife uses a tool where if you want to change what this person's saying, you can just edit the text and it will re-record the video. I have videos all the time that I'm like, all I need to change is 2 seconds because I said the wrong thing, or that is now out of date, that's not true anymore. And I wish I could just edit it without re-recording. So there's like tools like that that are, as an example of a specialist tool. And, you know, recognize the hype that everyone's saying they're incorporating AI, but generally only, if they're not a tech company and they're doing AI, they're basically, it's just a marketing term. Because only uber techies are going to be able to do this well. This is difficult. It's going to be hard for any organization with less than $1 billion to do this well, unless they're using tools that, you know, a $1 billion organization does as well. Now, I want to leave with a little bit of geek humor. You know, sometimes in my philosophical days, I wonder, is God just up there writing code, right? Which I don't think is the case, but, you know, I like this little line where, I don't know if that's Peter helping God there, say, you can't just punch in, let there be light, without writing the code underlying the user interface functions. I don't think that's how God's doing things, but sometimes it's interesting to think about things like that. So, any other questions or comments that you guys have on this?
Prove that AI isn't actually leading our discussion right now?
Yeah. You know, is it, you know, leading, yeah, am I an AI? I mean, there's going to be some interesting spaces that I think are going to emerge that are going to be pretty controversial. So, like, you look at the cost of counseling right now to the average client that you guys are serving, they can get good counseling while they're with you. I think that in 10 years, most people will get their counseling through AI bots. It won't be as good as a real person, but it'll be good enough for a lot of people. Now, that's worrying. And part of it is, can you frame the AI so it matches your worldview? So even like, how do Christians engage with something like that? Just like I shape these prompts, you could probably shape a counselor saying, you know, I want a counselor who has a Christian worldview, who has values like this, this, and this, that is going to help me work through these issues. And then you would probably get an AI counselor that has that, right? Now, that's not going to be as good as the real thing. And, you know, the one thing that I'm, you know, there's things that AI is not going to probably ever be good at. And one of the things I think is motivation. So if you have an AI counselor, you're going to lie to your counselor and not even blink. But if it's a real person, you think about that, and you have that depth of relationship, right? But part of it is, okay, well, is an AI counselor better than what they're doing right now? Is they're trying to counsel themselves based on whatever random Google search they did? Probably. So, you know, there's going to be some things along those lines that emerge that will be controversial in this space.